I knew the moment Brenda Patterson knocked on my door with that clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield that my winter was about to get complicated. "Tyler, we need to discuss a matter of utmost importance regarding community standards," she announced before I could even say hello. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the laminated papers as she stood on my porch in Ridgewood Heights, our planned community just outside Denver, Colorado. The November air was crisp, hinting at the brutal winter everyone predicted was coming. I leaned against the doorframe, already exhausted by whatever nonsense she was about to unload. "Morning, Brenda. What's the HOA upset about this time?" "The association has received numerous complaints about noise pollution during early morning hours," she said, her voice taking on that particular tone that made every word sound like a personal attack. "Specifically, the use of snowblowers and similar motorized snow removal equipment." I blinked at her. "It's not even snowing yet. We're being proactive, Tyler. Several residents have expressed concern that last winter's snow removal activities disrupted their peace and tranquility. The board met last night and we voted to implement new regulations." She thrust a paper at me. "Effective immediately, all motorized snow removal equipment is banned within Ridgewood Heights between the hours of 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. Additionally, we're implementing quiet hours on weekends until 10 a.m. I scanned the document, my irritation building with every word. "Brenda, I run a snow removal business. I've got contracts with half the neighborhood. Most people want their driveways cleared before they leave for work, which means I'm out here at 6 in the morning." "That's precisely the problem," she said, her lips pursing into a thin line. "Your commercial activities are disrupting residential harmony. The association has determined that manual snow removal methods are perfectly adequate for individual homeowner needs." Manual snow removal. Have you seen the forecasts? They're predicting we'll get hit harder than we have in a decade. "You want people out here with shovels during a blizzard. People managed for centuries before these noisy machines were invented," Brenda said primly. "Besides, the ordinance includes provisions for emergency situations. If accumulation exceeds 18 inches in a 24-hour period, temporary exceptions may be granted with prior board approval." "Prior board approval during a blizzard," I repeated slowly. "You're joking. The board takes community welfare very seriously, Tyler. I suggest you read through the entire ordinance. There's also a section about commercial vehicle parking in residential driveways and storage of equipment in visible areas." She smiled that smile that never reached her eyes. "I noticed your snowplow attachment has been sitting in your driveway. That will need to be moved to a garage or storage facility within 72 hours. I looked past her at my truck, which I just finished outfitting with the plow blade I used for my business. "My garage is full of equipment. Then I suggest you rent a storage unit. The fine for non-compliance is $200 per day." She turned on her heel, then paused. "Oh, and Tyler, if you're thinking about challenging this, remember that all residents signed binding arbitration agreements when they purchased their homes. Any disputes must go through the HOA's selected mediation service. Have a lovely day." I watched her march down my driveway, her sensible heels clicking against the concrete. Around the neighborhood, I could see other homeowners getting similar visits. My neighbor across the street, Marcus Chen, caught my eye and shook his head in disbelief, holding up his own copy of the ordinance. That evening, my phone started ringing. First it was Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over, a 78-year-old widow who'd relied on my services for the past 5 years. "Tyler, dear, I just got this letter about snow removal. Does this mean you won't be able to plow my driveway this winter? I can't possibly shovel it myself with my arthritis. I'm working on it, Mrs. Henderson. Let me see what I can do. But the calls kept coming. The Ramirez family, both parents working early shifts at the hospital. The Johnsons with their steep driveway that was nearly impossible to shovel by hand. Even some of the board members' neighbors called, clearly frustrated by Brenda's overreach. I spent the next morning researching the ordinance and our HOA's governing documents. The covenant I'd signed when I bought my house 3 years ago gave the board broad authority over aesthetic and environmental standards, but this felt like a stretch. I called Jake Morrison, an attorney friend from college who'd helped me set up my LLC. Can they actually do this? I asked after explaining the situation. Probably, Jake admitted. Colorado HOAs have pretty extensive powers, and if it's framed as a noise ordinance, they've got precedent. You could challenge it, but that arbitration clause is a problem. It means expensive mediation before you could even think about court. So I'm just supposed to let my business go under because Brenda Patterson doesn't like the sound of snowblowers. I didn't say that. I said challenging the ordinance directly would be costly and time-consuming. But here's the thing. You're not required to provide snow removal services to anyone. The ordinance bans you from using loud equipment during certain hours. It doesn't require you to shovel anyone's driveway manually. I sat with that for a moment. You're saying I should just stop offering the service entirely. I'm saying you should consider your options carefully. If the HOA wants to make life difficult, there might be creative ways to illustrate the consequences of their decisions. After hanging up, I looked at my contract list. 43 households in Ridgewood Heights paid me for snow removal services. 27 of those were monthly contracts for the entire winter season. I'd already collected partial payment from most of them. I started making calls. By the end of the day, I'd refunded every penny and canceled every contract within the HOA boundaries. Some people understood, many didn't. But I explained that with the new restrictions, I couldn't provide reliable service anymore. I'd be focusing on my commercial contracts and neighborhoods without these limitations. But Tyler, what are we supposed to do? Asked David Kim, a single father with 2 young kids. I leave for work at 6:30. If it snows overnight, I can't wait until 9 a.m. to clear my driveway. You could shovel it yourself, I suggested. Or maybe petition the board to reconsider their decision. I'm told Brenda Patterson was the driving force behind this ordinance. Perhaps if enough residents express their concerns, he sighed heavily. She won't listen. She never does. Last year she tried to ban any cars parked on the street overnight. The year before that, it was basketball hoops in driveways. She's got 3 other board members who just go along with whatever she wants. Then I guess we'll see how winter plays out, I said. The first snow came on December 3rd, just a dusting that barely covered the grass. I watched from my window as neighbors ventured out with shovels, clearing their walks and driveways without much trouble. Brenda herself came out in a designer parka, directing her husband Harold as he shoveled their driveway and sidewalk. She never touched the shovel herself, I noticed. The second snow came 5 days later, 3 inches overnight. That was enough to cause problems. I left my house at 7:30 that morning to grab coffee and saw the chaos firsthand. People were out in their work clothes, frantically shoveling, trying to clear enough space to get their cars out. I passed Mrs. Henderson's house and saw her trying to chip away at the snow with a garden spade, her movements slow and painful. I almost stopped. Almost. But I'd learned long ago that you can't help people who have made it clear they don't want your help. Or in this case, who have voted for leadership that actively prevented you from helping them. Instead, I drove to my commercial properties in downtown Denver, cleared their parking lots and sidewalks with my equipment, and was done by noon. My phone had 17 missed calls by the time I checked it. I didn't call anyone back. December 15th brought the first real storm. The Weather Service had been tracking it for days. A massive system moving down from Canada that was expected to dump anywhere from 8 to 14 inches across the Denver metro area. The snow started around midnight and didn't stop until late afternoon the next day. Ridgewood Heights got 12 inches. I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit, looked out my window at the pristine white landscape and went back to bed. At 6:30, the noise started. Not snowblowers, those were banned. Instead, it was the sound of dozens of people scraping shovels against concrete, grunting and cursing, car engines revving as people tried to power through snow their vehicles weren't designed to handle. By 8 a.m., my doorbell was ringing. I opened it to find Marcus Chen, my neighbor, covered in snow and looking exhausted. "Tyler, man, I know you canceled your contracts, but I'll pay you double your usual rate. My back is killing me and I've barely made a dent in this. I'm supposed to be at a client meeting at 10. "Can't help you, Marcus. HOA ordinance. Snowblowers are banned until 9 a.m. and even then only with restrictions. So come back at 9, I'll wait." I shook my head. After 9, I've got 4 commercial lots to clear. They're paying contracts and they don't have insane restrictions. "I'll be working until dark." "This is insane," he muttered. "Half the neighborhood can't get out of their driveways." "Maybe take it up with the board," I suggested. He stomped off, and I watched as he returned to his failing battle with the snow. His wife came out to help, both of them working in uncoordinated tandem while their 2 kids watched from the window. My phone rang again. Brenda Patterson. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Tyler, this is Brenda. I'm calling on behalf of the HOA board. We've received numerous complaints this morning about uncleared driveways and walkways. As a licensed snow removal professional residing in the community, we expect you to assist your neighbors in this emergency situation." "Is this an official emergency declaration from the board?" I asked. "What?" "No, I'm simply saying that as a member of this community. Because according to the ordinance you gave me, exceptions to the equipment restrictions require an official emergency declaration and prior board approval. Has the board convened to vote on this?" There was a long pause. "The board will be meeting this evening to discuss the situation." "Great. Have them call me after they've made an official determination. Until then, I'm following the ordinance exactly as written. No motorized equipment before 9 a.m. Have a good day, Brenda." I hung up before she could respond. Through my window, I could see she'd been calling from her own driveway, where Harold was red-faced and sweating despite the cold, trying to clear a path for her Mercedes. The thing about snow removal is that timing matters. Fresh snow is relatively light and manageable. But as people drive over it, walk through it, and temperatures fluctuate, it compacts and turns to ice. Every hour that passes makes the job exponentially harder. By the time 9 a.m. rolled around, and the ordinance technically allowed snowblower use, much of the snow in Ridgewood Heights had been packed down into an icy mess by desperate residents trying to get to work. I spent the day clearing my commercial contracts, earning a solid paycheck while staying warm in my truck. When I returned home around 5 p.m., the neighborhood looked like a disaster zone. Cars were stuck at odd angles in driveways. One had clearly slid into a mailbox. Many driveways were still only partially cleared, just enough of a channel carved out to squeeze a vehicle through. Sidewalks were a patchwork of cleared sections and untouched snow, creating hazards where people had given up partway through. Mrs. Henderson's driveway hadn't been touched at all. Her car sat buried in the garage behind a solid wall of snow. I felt a pang of guilt about that one, but I'd offered to refund her money, and she'd told me she understood. She'd even mentioned she had a nephew who might be able to help, though clearly that hadn't worked out. The next morning, I found a formal notice on my door. The HOA board was convening an emergency session that evening, and my attendance was strongly encouraged. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center. I showed up at 7:15, deliberately late, and found the room packed. Every chair was taken and people lined the walls. The energy in the room was tense, angry. At the front table sat Brenda Patterson, flanked by the other board members. Richard Caldwell, a retired accountant who clearly just wanted to keep his head down. Susan McNally, Brenda's closest ally and biggest enabler. And Jennifer Park, who at least occasionally showed signs of independent thought. Brenda gavelled the meeting to order, her expression tight. "Thank you all for coming. The board recognizes that this week's snowfall created some challenges for residents. We've called this meeting to address those concerns and discuss modifications to our recent snow removal ordinance." "Modifications?" someone shouted from the back. "How about you repeal the damn thing?" My wife threw out her back trying to shovel our driveway. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Please hold your comments until the public comment period," Brenda said sharply. The board has reviewed the situation and proposes the following amendments. First, we will allow motorized snow removal equipment to be used starting at 7 a.m. instead of 9 a.m. on weekdays only. Second, we will create an emergency declaration process that can be activated by a majority of board members via email, rather than requiring a formal meeting. Third, we will encourage residents to coordinate voluntary snow removal assistance for elderly and disabled neighbors. That doesn't solve anything. This time it was David Kim. Tyler Ingram had a service that worked perfectly fine. He was out at 6 a.m., had everyone's driveways cleared before most people woke up, and the whole neighborhood was taken care of. Now he's canceled all his contracts, and we're stuck doing it ourselves, or hiring people from outside the community who don't know our driveways and charge 3 times as much. All eyes turned to me. I raised my hand in a small wave. Brenda's expression hardened. Mr. Ingram chose to cancel his contracts. That was his decision, not the board's. "Because you made it impossible for him to operate," someone else called out. "The ordinance was passed to protect residents' peace and quality of life," Brenda insisted. "The complaints we received about early morning noise were numerous and serious." "Who complained?" I asked, speaking up for the first time. "I'd love to know which residents had such a problem with my service that we all have to suffer now." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Board discussions are confidential." "So you're saying you can't actually name anyone who complained?" I said. "Interesting." Jennifer Park leaned forward. "Brenda, I think in the interest of transparency, we should acknowledge that the complaints came primarily from you and Susan. Most residents we've heard from were satisfied with existing snow removal services." Susan McNally's face reddened. "That's not the point. The point is that HOA regulations exist to maintain standards. If we allow one person to operate loud machinery at all hours, where does it end?" 6 a.m. is hardly all hours," Marcus Chen interjected. "And Tyler wasn't running equipment at midnight. He was providing a service that made everyone's lives easier. This is ridiculous." The meeting devolved into chaos, with residents shouting over each other and Brenda frantically banging her gavel. I sat back and watched the show, feeling a grim satisfaction. The consequences of their poorly thought-out ordinance were playing out in real time. Finally, Richard Caldwell spoke up, his voice cutting through the noise. Perhaps we should table this discussion and survey the residents, get actual data on who was bothered by snow removal noise and who valued the services. Make a decision based on what the majority actually wants. The board doesn't govern by poll, Brenda snapped. We're elected to make decisions on behalf of the community. Then maybe it's time for a recall election, someone suggested, and the room erupted in cheers and applause. Brenda's face went through several shades of red. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, standing abruptly and gathering her papers. She stormed out, Susan following in her wake, leaving Richard and Jennifer to face the angry crowd. I left shortly after, but not before Mrs. Henderson caught my arm near the door. "Tyler, dear, I'm so sorry about all this. I had no idea Brenda was going to cause such problems. Is there any way you might reconsider? I'm happy to pay whatever you need." "It's not about the money, Mrs. Henderson," I said gently. "I can't operate under these restrictions." Even with their proposed amendments, 7 a.m. is too late for most people who work early shifts, and I'm not going to sit around waiting for an emergency declaration every time it snows. I've got other clients now, outside the HOA. They actually appreciate the work I do. Her face fell, and I felt like a jerk. But I couldn't solve everyone's problems, especially not when the very people who created those problems were actively working against solutions. The next week brought 2 more snowfalls, each dumping another 4 to 5 inches. The neighborhood looked increasingly haggard. People were hiring whoever they could find, paying premium prices for mediocre service. I watched from my window as a crew from some fly-by-night company damaged the Ramirez family's fence with a plow blade, then drove off before anyone could confront them. Another service left massive piles of snow blocking mailboxes, earning themselves citations from the Postal Service. My own driveway stayed perfectly clear. I'd get up, clear it with my snowblower in about 15 minutes, and then head off to my commercial contracts. The contrast between my pristine driveway and the chaos around me became increasingly stark. One morning, I found a note on my windshield. "Thanks for nothing, neighbor. So much for community spirit." It wasn't signed. That same day, I got an official notice from the HOA. Apparently, using my snowblower on my own property before 9 a.m. violated the ordinance, even though I wasn't operating a service. They were fining me $500. I called Jake Morrison again. "Can they fine me for clearing my own driveway?" I asked. "Unfortunately, yes. The ordinance bans the equipment during certain hours, period. It doesn't make exceptions for personal use versus commercial use. So I'm supposed to let my own driveway stay buried, or shovel it by hand, or clear it after 9 a.m. Tyler, I know this is frustrating, but technically they're within their rights here. Unless you want to move forward with that mediation process, which will cost you thousands." I paid the fine. And then I stopped clearing my driveway before 9 a.m. If they wanted to play hardball, I could play too. Christmas came and went. The neighborhood was quieter than usual, the holiday spirit dampened by the ongoing snow wars. I spent the holiday with my parents in Fort Collins, grateful for a break from the drama. January brought Colorado's real winter weather. The first week of the year saw a pattern of storms that meteorologists were calling unprecedented. Snow fell almost daily, sometimes just an inch or two, but accumulating relentlessly. By January 10th, Ridgewood Heights was buried under more than 30 inches of accumulated snow, with some drifts reaching 4 feet. The neighborhood had essentially given up. Most driveways had narrow channels carved through them, barely wide enough for a car, with walls of snow piled on either side. Sidewalks were mostly impassable. People parked on the street when they could, though the plows the city sent through only cleared enough for one lane of traffic, pushing more snow into driveways in the process. Mrs. Henderson hadn't been able to get her car out in 3 weeks. I'd seen her nephew show up once with a shovel, but he'd given up after an hour. Marcus Chen had thrown out his back and was walking with a visible limp. The Ramirez family had resorted to parking at the neighborhood entrance and walking the quarter-mile to their house because their driveway was completely blocked. My phone stopped ringing. I think people finally got the message that I wasn't coming back. On January 15th, Denver got hit with what the news called a once-in-a-generation blizzard. 22 inches in 36 hours, with winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour creating drifts that swallowed cars whole. The city declared a snow emergency. Schools closed. Major roads were impassable. I stayed home, watching the snow pile up, knowing that this was going to be the breaking point. My commercial clients were all shut down anyway. The entire city had ground to a halt. When the snow finally stopped on January 17th, Ridgewood Heights looked like it had been transported to the Arctic. The snow was so deep that you couldn't tell where driveways ended and lawns began. Cars were buried to their door handles. Mailboxes had disappeared entirely. The neighborhood was completely, utterly paralyzed. My phone rang at 8 a.m. Brenda Patterson, naturally. "Tyler, the board is declaring an official emergency. We need you to begin snow removal operations immediately. We'll waive all fines and restrictions. Just get out here and clear these driveways." I looked out my window at the catastrophic accumulation. This wasn't a few hours of work. This was days of around-the-clock effort, even with my equipment. The snow was packed so deep and dense that it would take multiple passes just to make a dent. "What's your hourly rate?" I asked. "What? Your normal contract rate is fine, just get started." "No, I don't think you understand. I don't have contracts anymore. You made sure of that. If you want me to dig out 40-plus driveways from under 4 feet of compacted snow, we're talking about emergency service rates. $200 per hour per property, with a minimum of 4 hours per driveway. Paid in advance." The silence on the other end was deafening. $200? That's outrageous. Your normal rate was $60 per month for the entire season. That was for regular maintenance, clearing fresh snow every few days. This is disaster recovery. You let this situation develop over months. If you'd let me do my job from the start, none of these driveways would be in this condition. But you wanted to ban snowblowers, so here we are. I'm sure you can find someone else willing to shovel all this by hand. Or maybe Harold can take care of the whole neighborhood himself. You're taking advantage of an emergency situation. I'm charging fair market rate for emergency services. Check with any other snow removal company. See what they quote you, if you can even find one that's available. I've got commercial clients waiting who actually value my work. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing with texts. First Brenda, threatening legal action. Then other board members pleading. Then individual residents, some angry, some desperate, some just asking if there was any way we could work something out. I ignored them all. I'd spent decades in Colorado, built a solid business through hard work and fair dealing. I'd bent over backwards for this neighborhood, provided reliable service at reasonable rates, and been available at all hours when emergencies hit. And they'd rewarded me by making it illegal for me to do my job, because Brenda Patterson didn't like waking up to the sound of a snowblower. That afternoon, I watched through my window as Brenda and Harold ventured out to their car. It took them 45 minutes just to locate it under the snow. They gave up trying to dig it out after another hour. Brenda looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before, her designer parka covered in snow, her perfect hair matted and disheveled. I felt a little bad, but only a little. The next day, the city started clearing main roads, but they couldn't help with private property. Residents were on their own. I saw people hiring anyone with a shovel, paying ridiculous amounts for minimal progress. Some families worked together, combining efforts to clear one driveway at a time. It was actually sort of heartwarming seeing the community come together, but it wasn't sustainable. People had to get to work. They had to get groceries. They had to live their lives. And they were trapped in a neighborhood buried under snow because their HOA board had been more concerned with peace and quiet than practicality. On January 20th, I got a formal letter, delivered by courier to avoid the buried mailboxes. The HOA board had called another emergency meeting. My presence was mandatory, not just encouraged. Failure to attend would result in additional fines. I showed up, curious what they'd cooked up this time. The community center was packed again, but the mood was different now. People looked exhausted, beaten down. Brenda sat at the front table, flanked by the other board members, and for once she didn't look smug or self-righteous. She looked tired. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "The board has been reviewing the snow removal ordinance in light of recent events. We acknowledge that the restrictions we put in place have created hardship for many residents." "Created hardship," someone shouted. "My mother fell on her sidewalk because she couldn't clear the ice." "She broke her wrist," Brenda flinched. "Yes, incidents like that are exactly why we're revisiting this policy. The board is prepared to fully repeal the snow removal ordinance, effective immediately." A murmur ran through the crowd. People looked surprised, cautiously hopeful. "Additionally," Brenda continued, "we're authorizing emergency funds from the HOA reserve to contract professional snow removal for all common areas, and to subsidize individual driveway clearing for residents who request assistance." "What about Tyler?" Jennifer Park asked, looking at me. "He's the one with the equipment and knowledge of our neighborhood. Shouldn't we be contracting with him?" All eyes turned to me again. Brenda's expression was difficult to read. "Mr. Ingram has made it clear he's not interested in working with Ridgewood Heights anymore," Brenda said stiffly. "Because you drove him away," David Kim stood up. "This whole disaster is your fault, Brenda. You and Susan pushed through that ordinance despite everyone telling you it was a bad idea. Tyler had 40-plus contracts. He was taking care of nearly every house in the neighborhood. And you banned him from doing it because you didn't like the noise at 6 a.m. The board acted on what we believed were legitimate resident complaints," Susan interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. "Complaints from you." Marcus Chen joined in. "Jennifer said it at the last meeting. This whole thing was driven by you and Brenda. Nobody else cared. And now look at us. We're buried, people are hurt, and Tyler's out there making money hand over fist clearing commercial lots while we're stuck with shovels." "I motion for a vote of no confidence in the current board leadership," someone called out. Seconded. Brenda's face went pale. "That's not how HOA governance works. Board members serve annual terms. Elections are in April." "Then I motion for early elections," Jennifer Park said, her voice carrying clearly. "Our bylaws allow for special elections under emergency circumstances. I'd say this qualifies." Richard Caldwell nodded slowly. "I'll second that motion. Brenda, Susan, you've overreached here." The membership needs a chance to determine new leadership. The vote was overwhelming. Only Susan voted against it, with Brenda abstaining in a futile attempt to maintain dignity. Elections would be held in 2 weeks, as soon as ballots could be prepared and distributed. After the meeting, several residents approached me. Mrs. Henderson, the Ramirez family, Marcus Chen, and about a dozen others. They apologized for the situation, acknowledged that I'd been treated unfairly, and asked if there was any chance I'd consider returning. "I don't know," I admitted. "This whole thing left a bad taste. I've got good contracts now with clients who appreciate my work." "What if we paid you what you asked?" Mrs. Henderson said. "Not all of us, obviously, but some of us could afford it. Could you at least clear driveways for whoever can pay your emergency rate?" I thought about it. The vindictive part of me wanted to refuse, to let them stew in the consequences of their leadership's choices. But looking at their tired faces, at Mrs. Henderson's cast, at Marcus limping on his bad back, I couldn't quite justify punishing everyone for Brenda's mistakes. "I'll tell you what," I said. "I'll clear driveways for anyone who wants to hire me at my regular emergency rate, $200 per hour, minimum 4 hours. But only after every household has had a chance to sign up. I'm not playing favorites or creating drama about who gets cleared first. Everyone pays the same, everyone gets service in the order they sign up." They agreed quickly. By the next morning, I had a list of 23 households willing to pay my rates. It was going to be brutal work, but the money would be substantial. More importantly, it felt like finally getting some recognition for the value I provided. I started on January 21st. Even with my professional equipment, the job was backbreaking. The snow had consolidated into dense, heavy masses that fought every pass of the snowblower. I had to make multiple runs on each driveway, clearing layers bit by bit. My first job took 6 hours. The second took 5. By the end of the first day, I'd cleared 3 driveways and earned $3,400. Word spread fast. More residents called, asking to get on the list. Some tried to negotiate the rates. I held firm. This was the market price for disaster recovery, and after months of being jerked around by the HOA, I wasn't budging. Over the next week, I worked 12-hour days. My body ached, my hands were numb despite heavy gloves, and I was exhausted. But the satisfaction of seeing driveways emerge from the snow, of watching grateful families finally able to access their cars and homes normally, made it worthwhile. Mrs. Henderson cried when I finished her driveway. "Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much. I felt like a prisoner in my own home." The Ramirez family brought me hot chocolate and homemade tamales. Marcus Chen helped me move snow piles, working despite his bad back because he was just so grateful to have his driveway functional again. I didn't clear everyone. Some residents couldn't afford my rates, and I understood that. A few refused on principle, still angry at me for not working for free. Brenda Patterson's house stayed buried. She never called, never asked, and I never offered. Every time I drove past her house, I saw Harold out there with a shovel, making slow, painful progress. It took him 11 days to clear their driveway enough to get 1 car out. The special election happened on February 5th. Brenda and Susan were both voted out by landslide margins. Jennifer Park was elected board president. Richard Caldwell stayed on. 2 new members joined, including David Kim, who'd been vocal throughout the whole fiasco. One of their first acts was to formally repeal the snow removal ordinance and issue a written apology to me for the regulatory overreach that created unnecessary hardship for both residents and service providers. They asked if I'd consider reinstating my contracts for the remainder of the season. "At what rate?" I asked when Jennifer called me. "Whatever you think is fair. The board recognizes that your original rates were more than reasonable, but we also understand if you need to account for the disruption and additional work required." I thought about it carefully. The truth was, I'd missed working in Ridgewood Heights. These were my neighbors, my community. I'd built relationships with these families over the years, And while the money from emergency rates was nice, I didn't want to be the guy gouging people during a crisis forever. "I'll come back," I said. "But I want a few things in writing. First, no restrictions on equipment or operating hours beyond what's legally required by the city. Second, a clause that says if the HOA tries to regulate my business operations again, they owe me liquidated damages equal to the full season's contract value. Third, payment in full upfront for anyone who wants service for the rest of this season." "Done," Jennifer said immediately. "I'll have Richard draw up the contract language. Tyler, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this played out." "You were right. Brenda was wrong, and the whole neighborhood paid the price." By mid-February, I had 37 reinstated contracts in Ridgewood Heights. The remaining snowfalls that season were light, just a few inches here and there, easy to manage. But every time I fired up my snowblower at 6 a.m. and cleared driveways before residents woke up, it felt like a small victory. Brenda Patterson moved out in March. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and Harold had put their house up for sale the day after the election results came in. They relocated to a condo in Boulder, where I imagine she's busy finding new things to regulate and control. Susan McNally stayed, but kept a low profile, no longer organizing committees or hosting board meetings at her house. Spring came eventually, as it always does in Colorado. The snow melted, revealing lawns that would need serious repair and driveways with cracks from ice expansion. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though there was a palpable shift in the community dynamic. People were more aware of HOA governance now, more engaged with who was making decisions and why. In April, the regular board elections came around. Jennifer Park ran unopposed for president. The membership voted to amend the bylaws, requiring resident approval for any regulations that would restrict existing business operations or services. They also implemented term limits and recall procedures, making it harder for any one person to dominate the board. I expanded my business that year, adding 3 new employees and doubling my commercial contracts. But I kept Ridgewood Heights as my core residential area. Those early morning runs through the neighborhood, clearing driveways while families slept peacefully, became my favorite part of the job again. Mrs. Henderson baked me cookies regularly. The Ramirez family invited me to their summer barbecue. Marcus Chen and I started getting beers together occasionally, laughing about the great snow wars. The neighborhood kids, who'd watched the whole drama play out, started a snow shoveling business of their own, clearing sidewalks for pocket money. I gave them tips and let them borrow equipment when they needed it. One November morning, as I was preparing my truck for the coming season, a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking professional and determined. "Tyler Ingram. I'm Wendy Norris from the Denver Post. I'm doing a piece on HOA overreach and heard about what happened here last winter. Would you be willing to talk about it?" I considered saying no. The whole thing was behind us, and I didn't want to stir up old drama. But then I thought about other people living under unreasonable HOA restrictions, other service providers being driven out of neighborhoods by arbitrary rules. "Sure," I said, "but I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge or making anyone look bad. It's about common sense. HOAs serve a purpose, but they need accountability. They need to remember they're serving communities, not ruling them." The article ran 3 weeks later. It was fair and balanced, interviewing me, several residents, Jennifer Park, and even Richard Caldwell. They tried to reach Brenda Patterson, but she declined to comment. The piece sparked conversations across the Denver metro area about HOA governance, leading to proposed state legislation about transparency and member rights. That winter was mild compared to the previous one, but I was ready regardless. My contracts were signed, my equipment was maintained, and my reputation was stronger than ever. When the first snow fell on December 1st, I was out at 5:30 a.m., clearing driveways under streetlights, the sound of my snowblower echoing through quiet streets. Nobody complained. A few neighbors even came out to wave and thank me, bringing coffee and donuts. It was everything the previous winter should have been, everything I'd built my business to provide. As I finished Mrs. Henderson's driveway and moved on to the next house, I thought about the whole journey. The frustration, the anger, the vindictive satisfaction of watching the neighborhood struggle, and ultimately the resolution. It hadn't been pretty, but it had been necessary. Sometimes people need to experience the consequences of bad decisions before they understand why those decisions were wrong. The snow kept falling and I kept clearing it. That's what I do. That's what I'd always done. And now, finally, I could do it without arbitrary restrictions, without interference from people who valued their own preferences over community welfare, without fighting against the very people I was trying to help. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Park. Tyler just wanted to say thanks again. Woke up to a clear driveway and remembered what a nightmare last year was. We're lucky to have you. I smiled and pocketed the phone. Yeah, I thought, we're lucky to have each other. That's what community is supposed to be about. Not rules for the sake of rules, not power trips disguised as governance, but people working together to make life better for everyone. The sun was rising over the mountains now, painting the snow-covered roofs of Ridgewood Heights in shades of pink and gold. It was going to be a good day. It was going to be a good winter. And somewhere in Boulder, I imagined Brenda Patterson was probably drafting a complaint about someone's holiday decorations or improperly parked bicycle. But that was her problem now, not mine, not Ridgewood Heights. I fired up the snowblower and moved to the next driveway. The sound echoed through the morning air, loud and proud and completely unrestricted. It was the sound of someone doing their job, serving their community, making life easier for people who appreciated the work. It was the sound of victory. Over the following months, I established myself not just as a snow removal contractor, but as a small business advocate within the community. When the new board considered regulations about home businesses, I spoke at meetings about the importance of flexible policies. When they discussed noise ordinances, I helped draft language that balanced resident comfort with practical needs. The transformation in Ridgewood Heights was remarkable. People paid attention now. Meeting attendance quintupled. Board decisions were scrutinized and debated. The days of rubber stamping whatever Brenda Patterson wanted were long gone, replaced by genuine democratic governance. I also started getting calls from other neighborhoods, people trapped under similar unreasonable HOA restrictions. I couldn't help all of them directly, but I shared my story, connected them with Jake Morrison and other attorneys, and encouraged them to organize and push back. Some fought their battles and won. Others moved to neighborhoods with saner governance. But they all learned the same lesson I had. HOAs only have the power residents give them. By the time spring arrived and the last of the snow melted away, revealing the green grass underneath, Ridgewood Heights felt like a different place. The same houses, the same streets, but a fundamentally different community spirit. People looked out for each other more. They questioned authority more. They valued practical services over theoretical ideals. And me, I kept doing what I'd always done, but with a newfound appreciation for it. Every contract I signed, every driveway I cleared, every grateful wave from a resident heading to work on a snowy morning, all of it meant something more now. It wasn't just business. It was proof that common sense could prevail, that communities could correct course, that standing your ground sometimes led to better outcomes for everyone. The next November, as I prepared for another season, Mrs. Henderson stopped by with a plate of cookies and a card signed by 40 residents. "Thank you for not giving up on us," the card read, "even when we gave you every reason to." I hung that card in my garage, right next to my business license and insurance certificates. On difficult days, when equipment broke down or weather turned nasty, or I was just tired and sore and questioning why I did this job, I'd look at that card and remember that communities are built by people who show up and do the work, day after day, even when it's hard. Remember that bad policies can be changed when people stand up to them. Remember that letting people face the consequences of their decisions isn't cruelty, it's education. And remember that the sound of a snowblower at 6 a.m., far from being a disruption, is the sound of someone caring enough to make sure their neighbors can get to work on time, can take their kids to school, can live their lives without being trapped by weather they can't control. That winter was perfect, not because the weather was mild or the snow was light, but because everything worked the way it was supposed to. I cleared snow. Residents paid their bills. The HOA stayed out of the way. The neighborhood functioned like a well-oiled machine, everyone playing their part. On the last day of March, as the final snow of the season dusted the ground with just an inch of light powder, I did my final run through the neighborhood. It barely needed clearing, but I did it anyway, a symbolic closing of the season. When I finished and parked my truck in my garage, I saw neighbors had lined their driveways, applauding as I drove past. It was embarrassing and touching and perfect. I waved, honked my horn, and pulled into my garage with a grin on my face. Marcus Chen came over that evening with a six-pack. We sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about nothing important. Eventually, the conversation turned to the previous winter. "You know," Marcus said, "I was mad at you for a while. When you canceled your contracts and refused to help, I thought you were being petty. Punishing all of us for what Brenda did." "Maybe I was," I admitted. "A little. But you were also right. If you'd caved, if you just kept working under their stupid restrictions, nothing would have changed. Brenda would still be running the board, we'd still have insane regulations, and the HOA would keep overreaching on other things. Sometimes, you have to let people face consequences before they'll make better choices." "I prefer to think I was just protecting my business interests," I said with a slight grin. Marcus laughed. "Sure, buddy. Whatever helps you sleep at night. But between you and me, you did this neighborhood a favor. A painful, expensive, frustrating favor, but a favor nonetheless." We clinked bottles and drank to that. To painful lessons learned, to communities that could adapt and improve, to the value of standing your ground even when it would be easier to give in. The years that followed were good ones. My business grew steadily. Ridgewood Heights became known as one of the better-managed HOA communities in the Denver area, attracting residents who valued sensible governance. Property values increased. Community events became better attended. The neighborhood thrived. I never saw Brenda Patterson again. Heard she'd gotten elected to her new condo HOA board in Boulder and was making waves there too. Something about restricting visitor parking. Some people never learn, but that was their problem, not mine. Every winter, when the first snow fell, I'd wake up early, start my truck, and head out into the pre-dawn darkness. The sound of my snowblower would echo through sleeping streets, clearing paths, making life easier, serving my community in the simple, practical way I knew how. And that, I realized, was enough. Not glory, not vindication, not revenge. Just the satisfaction of doing good work for people who appreciated it in a community that had learned to value practical service over petty control. The snow would fall. I would clear it. Spring would come again. Year after year, season after season, one driveway at a time. It was simple, honest work. And after everything that had happened, I wouldn't have traded it for anything.